Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I have Michael Crusoe with me, former principal timpanist of the Seattle Symphony. Welcome on.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to be here.
Hey, how's life after leaving a major symphony gig? That's like a full-time gig. You leave, and now what are you doing?
Well, I'm now performing part-time. I play with the Teton Music Festival
Oh,
during the summer, yeah. And then other times I'm spending time just doing other stuff that I like to do, like working out at the gym. I'm involved in the martial arts. I do some teaching in the martial arts, that sort of thing.
oh wow. So what sort of martial arts?
Uh, I do a combination of my original martial art is it's called non-classical kung fu.
Uh-huh.
I trained with Jesse Glover, who was a close friend and a student of Bruce Lee when Bruce came to Seattle. And then I also practiced Filipino form of martial arts called eskrima.
Wow.
Yeah, it deals with stick fighting, knife fighting, that sort of thing. And then I also trained in an art called Infinity Concepts.
Wow.
My teacher is a guy named Steve Smith there in Walla Walla, and it's a combination of gung fu and the screamer, basically.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that about you. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, so with this current situation, I recently read you posted something online, and you said that you're not. It's going to be probably the first time in your career that you're not performing for a full year, I guess. So, how are you dealing with the current situation, and what are you doing musically during this time?
Well, I'm as far as dealing with the current situation, I'm trying to follow all the rules. You know, the social distancing. I don't go anywhere unless I absolutely have to, and you take precautions when you do. And musically, basically, for me, it involves keeping my hands in shape. You know, so I have my mallets and the drum pad because the drums I use are in Wyoming or in where the festival is located. So basically, I just keep my hands loose. The martial arts actually help, believe it or not. And as far as you know, uh, studying music itself, I've always approached my job like I were a conductor, which basically means there's a work that I'm due to perform. You know, I get a score, I listen to it, I learn who's doing what, you know, as though I have to cue them, you know, that sort of thing. So, and there was an approach that I established back in college. So basically, I reverted back to what I used to do in college when I didn't have drums immediately handy, where I get a score, music, and just study and read. So that's pretty much how I maintain, you know, until I actually get to perform. But with tea time being canceled, and understandably so, you know, that's my playing gig for the year, and so that's no longer there, you know.
Wow.
So yeah, but I'll manage. You know, it's kind of like riding a bike
Yeah.
after a while. Yeah.
Well, you've played every piece probably a couple of times, especially the standard orchestral repertoires over your career. What's one piece that you just absolutely can't wait to go back to, or at least have a chance to play it one more time?
Oh, well, it's hard to name one. I know, for example, we were scheduled to do Brahms one this summer,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh, you know, they got canceled. I tell you a piece I like to do. I've only had a chance to perform once in my career, thanks to Ludo, and that's the Britain Nocturne. You know, that's a piece I would love to be able to perform again. But I don't know. I've got so many favorite works. It's just hard to pick one. You know,
Yeah.
There's so many I just can't wait. You know, to get a chance to perform again.
Yeah. Well, you've performed with two conductors for Seattle Symphony specifically, who really did a lot of work for the organization, for the city musically. You know, both of them brought more attention to Seattle and took the orchestra to a different level, to a different place. What are some memorable moments with maybe both tenures of those conductors?
Well, actually, there are three. Started with Rainer Midel, who actually was conductor when he's the one that hired me initially.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and I just have uh, fond memories of each conductor. You know, with Midel, uh, it was Brahms and Bruckner, and awakening for me there in that regard. With Jerry Schwartz, he championed American music. So I got to play a lot of repertoire there that I hadn't known. And with Ludo, it was Due to You. I a lot of his works I had never even heard of. And I mean, they were like big timpani parts, that we recorded. So uh, their leadership, I always say, it helped put me on the map as a player because of the repertoire that they championed and that we subsequently recorded. When you record, the whole world is
Yeah.
gets to hear you play. Yeah. And then I have to add the current maestro there in Seattle. I'm happy to say that my last recording with the orchestra was under Thomas, and it was the Nielsen Inextinguishable.
Wow.
So yeah, so I've got all this music here on disc, that I can look back on and cherish the moments.
Yeah. Well, going back early on, how does one get into timpani? Did you start out playing percussion, or you knew timpani was it and you wanted to get to that? What was the early years of young Mike as a percussionist or timpanist?
I started out in drum and bugle corps.
Okay.
I had my older cousin, Philip. Uh, he pretty much paved the way in that regard. When I saw him going to drum and bugle corps, and I saw him playing drums, I got really interested in it. And he worked with me a little bit. And long short story short, to fast forward, he encouraged me to join the high school band, and which I did. And it was there where I actually got started. I was initially just a drummer, and then I just walked over to the timpani one day because they needed someone to play timpani, and I just went over and picked it up and did it. And I was just fascinated by the fact that here was a drum of musical pitch, And so that's pretty much where I got started. And then I started studying privately once I ended college. So that's kind of the short version of how it is that I got into playing timpani. It started in high school.
Yeah, and from what I understand, Seattle Symphony was your third audition, your only the third audition that you did, and got it.
Correct. Let's see. It was Grand Rapids was my first audition.
Uh-huh.
All right. I pretty much did it for the experience, to tell you the truth. Then the second one was the Kansas City Philharmonic, which was a job that I felt at the time I really wanted, because being from St. Louis, that was just right down the highway, So I didn't get that one. And then I auditioned for Seattle, and I wasn't going to do it at first. After the first two auditions, I started to think, maybe this is not for me, And during that time, I was playing with an orchestra, the St. Louis Philharmonic, which was a big regional orchestra there in St. Louis. And long story short, I was on my way to the St. Louis Philharmonic rehearsal one day, and I was listening to a recording of New England Triptych on the radio, on a classical music station, on my way to rehearsal. And, it has this big timpani part, particularly in the first movement. And I was listening to this, and I was really getting into this guy's playing on the, that I was listening. And I showed up, and I was running the risk of being late for rehearsal because I was so captivated by what I was hearing on the radio. Well, long story short, when the recording ended, the radio host came on and said, "You've been listening to a live performance of the St. Louis Youth Symphony Orchestra." And I realized I was listening to myself because what happened was the St. Louis Youth Symphony, they had gone on a tour with then conductor Gerard Zimmerman, I believe was his name.
Oh, wow, okay.
And when they returned to St. Louis, they had a live performance there in Powell Hall. And my friend Stanley, who was the timpanist there, he had to take off for something, a family matter or something, and they needed someone to come in at the last minute to play. Well, guess who that was? I got the call, and I went in and did the triptych, and other stuff on that, and just had a ball. And I didn't realize that performance was recorded, and that was the recording I was listening to on the radio. So that, just when I was about to give up any aspirations of playing, because my background is in music education, after I heard that, I thought, well, maybe there is something, that there's a chance of me making it as a performer. So
Wow.
I took one more audition after that, and it was Seattle,
Wow.
and the rest is history, as they say.
Wow. And you never, now that you're retired, you left Seattle Symphony. Were there ever moments where you're like, this, I don't know what orchestras opened up at the time, like New York Phil or something in Europe opened up. I want to take that audition. Did you ever consider?
There was, there were two orchestras that actually opened up that I actually auditioned for. One was the LA Philharmonic,
Okay.
because at one point I had gotten a call from them to come and perform at the Hollywood Bowl. They did Mahler second, and the timpanist there took off. And they called for two players, so I was invited down, and I enjoyed playing at the Hollywood Bowl. I mean, it was great. So when the job opened up, I auditioned for that. Didn't get it, and the second one that I auditioned for was the National Symphony. They had invited, prior to auditioning for them, they had actually invited me out when their timpanist left, because they wanted someone to hold down the chair until they actually held formal auditions. So I was invited to do that. Symphony decided, no, you're too important. We can't let you go, spend that, So I didn't ask you to do that. So when the job opened up, I went and auditioned for it, because I hadn't auditioned in a while. And, it was kind of a way to kind of test yourself, you know what I mean? To make it, because you never want to sit back and become satisfied, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much where my head was at. It had nothing to do with not being happy in Seattle. It was a challenge thing
Yeah.
as a player.
Yeah. So any timpani concertos, because you don't often hear timpani concertos, I mean, you might hear a flute concerto before you hear a timpani concerto. And of course there's a violin and cello and piano that take over. But what are some timpani concertos you've played? Or if you don't want to talk about that, then maybe something that you really want to play, or,
Well, first of all, there are more today than like when I first started. And I performed two concertos with the orchestra. The first time I did it, it was my second season in the orchestra, because Rainer Medell wanted to feature me as a soloist, and I performed a concerto by a composer named Werner Thurkin, who's also a timpanist. I think he was a timpanist in one of the big German orchestras, turned composer. And then the second time I did it was in Benaroya Hall. Deborah Card wanted to feature, I was aware of an unusual solo to commission it was January 2000. And I agreed to do this piece by Hertel for a timpani and orchestra. So I performed two concertos. I've never been a real fan of them myself. And it's because I know this might sound funny as a soloist in an orchestra, but I've always preferred being in the background and not, like featured kind of thing. So whenever I was asked to do that, I always balked at it and procrastinated before finally agreeing to do it. And like I said, all the years I was there, I only did it twice, and for me that was enough. But there are a lot more now that are written than when I started. My friend Dave Herbert, who's now timpanist in Chicago, he premiered a piece for, I forget, it's for like 18 timpani or something. It's by William Kraft, who was a former timpanist in the LA Philharmonic. Yeah. I haven't actually heard the work, but man, the setup is pretty. Looks like something out of the space age. It's pretty cool.
Well, one thing that I like to ask my guests is this is kind of a standard question: is the life-changing moment. And I know it's tough, and you could say something, maybe a personal life-changing moment and a musical life-changing moment. And I know, if you want to say a couple, that's fine too, because some of my previous guests have said, "Oh, well, that's really tough because I have 3 or 4 life-changing moments." What are some of your life-changing moments?
I don't know. There's several different ones I can think of, like for different reasons. I guess, I mean, I can start from when I got married to my first kid, you know, to my first dream job, you know, as a career. I think once I got the job, I mean, there were life-changing moments in terms of opportunities that were afforded me, you know, once I was there. So it's kind of hard, again, to pick one. But if I were to give you an overview of life-changing moments, it'd be my lifelong progression between, on a personal level, between marriage, being a dad, having a family, having a career, you know, and the way the career took off, you know, up until the time when I decided for a change. You know, it was a life changing moment. So that's kind of an overview that I can offer as far as life changing moments.
Well, going back to Seattle Symphony, you're still young, and you're just a dynamic player. Every time I've seen you, you're very exciting to just even watch when you're watching the Seattle Symphony perform. Why leave? Why leave so early? It seems early.
Yeah, it was. There comes a time when a player has to make a decision, just like a conductor does, or his employer does. You know, when you've when you feel you've done all that you can do, then it reaches a point where the rest is no longer up to you. You know what I mean? So, you know, a good example, I think, is to give you a sport analysis. Tom Brady of the New England. I mean, here's a guy I mean, he did everything you could possibly ask a quarterback to do for a football team, you know, and his record surpasses all of his peers, you know. But now he's no longer in New England. You know what I mean? So again, it's once you've done all that you can do as a player, like I said, the rest, you know, is no longer up to you, and it's up to the situation. You know, there were certain things that I wanted to get done that I came to realize that I had taken things as far as I could go. You know, so at that point, you have to make a decision, and in terms of what you feel is best for you. And I feel I've done that, and in a very timely manner. So I'm being tactful, you know, but to answer your question, basically it came down to doing what you feel is best to handle your situation. That's basically, you know, how soon you do it or how late you do it, you know, circumstances can dictate that. But I'm very happy to have had the career that I've had in Seattle. And like I said, I'm still playing, but basically I'm doing it on my own terms, and I'm kind of winding down the career. You know, is what it kind of boils down to.
Yeah. Well, with all that knowledge, do you still actively teach? Do you have private students?
No, I don't. I don't have any private students other than those that I work with on a martial arts level. But that's something I'm still open to. I just haven't actively pursued that. But you know, that's something I'm definitely still considering doing.
Yeah. Well, with classical musicians, it's always interesting to get their playlist that's not the classical music playlist. What do you listen to if you don't listen to your own recordings and practice your own parts? What do you listen to?
I like R&B. I like jazz. As a matter of fact, after concerts, when I got in the car, first thing I do is, you know, I turn on one of my favorite popular music stations. Kind of down, you know, yeah, because I don't, you know, listening to classical music, it for the most part for me, it's kind of like work. I mean, it's enjoyable work, but you know, that's what I have to do, you know. So a lot of times when I want to sit and listen to music, I'll just listen to stuff, especially music that takes me back to, you know, times as a kid, you know, growing up and so forth. So R&B and jazz is pretty much my
okay.
when it comes to listening. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say not so much R&B, but jazz is definitely something I listen to a lot of, and I've had the fortune to have some great jazz artists on this podcast as well to talk to.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love it, and I do listen to it a lot. One thing that's in classical music nowadays, and this is a bit of a tough topic, but a lot of people talk about diversity in music, whether it's African American or people from diverse backgrounds, different parts of the world in classical music, and also women conductors and women in classical music and orchestras in general. What's
Yeah.
been your experience? And it's one thing to talk a lot about it and try to incorporate a lot of composers and from diverse backgrounds in classical music, but it's another thing to actually step up and do it. What are your thoughts in general? What do you think should be done more actively from the symphony orchestra and the big nonprofit organizations? What are your thoughts in general? I just would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a complex subject. I think that I think there's a systemic issue when trying to address that. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with race, although uh, it can impact that, so to speak. It's like, if I draw up a scenario, let's say conductor A has an orchestra that he's been there for years, and then he gets courted by another orchestra to be music director, and he takes that. In the orchestra that he just left, he may have a favorite player, a principal player in particular, that he really likes. And when that position opens up in his new orchestra, guess who he really wants to. So now, to the extent that he can deal with that, depends on the audition process of the new orchestra. But the point is, he wants that player if he can get him, right?
Mhm.
So now, if you throw in the race equation, if the player he wants is Caucasian, and he works it out where he gets that player out of favoritism, but then there's an African American musician who's auditioned for that same spot. Well, although his actions were not race based, it still contributes to the problem
Mhm.
of attrition, when it turns to high minority players. Now, if you reverse that, let's say the player that he wants is African American and he wants to put him in that position. Well, then someone can look at that and say, well, he's contributed to affirmative action.
Mhm.
You see, the analogy here is that it is, for the most part, it could be a systemic issue
Mhm.
that in fact impacts the concern about minorities or the lack of in symphony orchestras.
Yeah.
Now, the solution to it, in my opinion, it comes down to a system where you have blind auditions, okay, and where you don't allow, an opening or a situation or a channel that's going to feed that systemic approach, where it's basically a clean slate. Everyone's behind the screen. Okay, there's no advancing people. If you do, it's behind the screen still, so that you don't see who's there. Uh, and that's to me, that's the answer. The other part of the problem, I think, is the regarding the process is that if you've got a player who's been playing for like 15 to 20 years and he goes to audition for another orchestra, for that player to have to go through prelims along with candidates who are less experienced, maybe even right out of school, that doesn't make sense either. Now, the counter argument to that is that, well, if you advance them, then they're having the opportunity that the younger player with less experience has, and that's true. But if it's behind the screen, you don't know who's who. Then what's the issue? So that's my perspective on it. There's a systemic issue that can impact the concern about the lack of minorities in symphony orchestras. And I think the way to do it is to make sure you have a system in place where everyone, where the system is blind and everyone actually has a shot at the job.
Yeah. Well, how about early on in the education level? You know, one thing, at least for me, has been a little bit frustrating because I don't, my parents didn't have much money. And one thing that's been frustrating is getting into some of these festivals, is paying for, you know, music education. And I feel that from a minority perspective or diversity perspective, the economic status has something to do with it as well. You know,
Absolutely.
and when you look at sports, for example, African American athletes or minority athletes tend to do so well in martial arts, for example, or basketball or some of these sports, and then you don't see too many of them in like tennis or hockey or some of these other sports. Not because they don't want to, but because it takes you need more money to be in those sports. I think because I think. Minority athletes or Black athletes, African American athletes would do equally well in tennis. And I mean, Serena Williams and some of the some of the ones who've had breakthroughs have had success. But sometimes it's the economic status, huh?
Yeah, it is very much so. That I mean, that's kind of across the board in life, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's, you know, one of the things that I saw fall by the wayside over time is education outreach.
Huh.
You know, in turn when it comes to it, and that's I recall one year a group of us in the Seattle Symphony, we went and we volunteered our time to go into they call them high risk areas, you know, to reach kids to teach music, and we volunteered our time with the hope of our presence being able to generate funding so that the kids can have instruments, and then so that they can have private lessons, you know, we stuck with that for several months, and just we couldn't get we just couldn't get the situation to move at all. We couldn't get the contributions, we couldn't get the commitments, you know, and it was frustrating. We ended up giving up, but to me, that's where a lot of it starts, you know. I remember. Here's a defining moment that you asked about earlier. At high school assembly, we had an assembly. We was just the band students, and it was the percussion section from the St. Louis Symphony that came and did a percussion clinic there at our high school. And I saw the guy who I eventually studied with, the late Rick Holmes. I was fascinated by the way that he was playing, you know, and that to me, it was at that point I actually decided that I think I'm going to go ahead and major in music, you know, in college. So I think, you know, education is real important, and you gotta, where minorities are concerned, it's really crucial to be able to reach that at an early age, you know, in terms of outreach, and to keep it going. You don't have that problem in athletes because it's big business, you know. I mean, if a kid, I mean, he can be 14 years old, you know, if he runs a 100-yard dash, you know, in record time, well, colleges all over the, you know, all over the world are going to be tracking this kid, you know, to try to get him to come to their school, you know. So it's the value that they put on it. And I just think there needs to be more value put on education outreach when it comes to music. I think that'll help go a long way as far as recruiting more minority musicians.
Yeah,
which will subsequently impact two symphony orchestras.
Yeah. Having played for so many years, there must be some moments where you were just terrified, or a moment that kind of fell apart and you had to fix it in the moment. I mean, you might have to think about it for a little bit, but are there moments like that?
Yeah, that comes natural. I don't have to think about it at all. There've been those moments, you know, and it's just what is Murphy's law? You know, it's just if you do it long enough, things are going to happen. Right? And I can tell you, you know, I always get a good chuckle out of, you know, when I used to hear people say to me, they say, you know, you're so good, you never make a mistake, you know, during a performance. And I'm like, oh, it's, you know, confession time, right? So it happens, and you know, some of it is I guess all of it, when you look back on it, it's just another experience in life, that you can laugh about. But it ain't so funny at the time that it happens. So yeah, I've definitely had those moments. So you want some examples, right?
That'll be awesome. That'll be awesome.
Okay. Let's see. I remember what's the conductor's name? Jesus Lopez. We were playing a piece by Ravel. Oh, I forget the name of it. And then there comes a point where the orchestra drops out and the timpani plays a solo downbeat. Well, we got to that spot and I know it's there. I'm supposed to play, and I hear it in my head, and I'm watching the conductor, and I don't play. And he looks at me, and he nods, and I'm looking at him, and he nods again, and I realize, oh, and then boom, I'll play it. I mean, it's like a 5-second lag time between when the orchestra stops and the timpani plays the downbeat. And he really thanked me later. He says, because we couldn't have gone on with the piece unless you played that downbeat, And then there was one friend of mine who happened to be he was on sabbatical, and he came back for that performance, and he was in the audience. A friend of mine named John DeJoyner, and John backstage, he had noticed the mistake. And he says to me, he says, yeah, I noticed the orchestra tends to play a little bit behind the beat since I left, I mean, it's typical John,
Yeah.
And another, one of my favorite conductors to have worked with is the late Marvin Hamlish.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just a brilliant musician. Well, we was doing a Pops concert, and we had cue sheets, and they talk and you go along, and each section plays their cue as Marvin calls upon. Well, on this one particular performance, there was a cut in the cue sheet, right, that I did not get. I mean, I missed it, because they do these before the performance. So I didn't notice it before the performance. And we get to that moment, we're going along the shit, and Marvin's out in the audience, engaging as always, and then he calls for the next cue, which is timpani, calls out, and then there's nothing. I look up, and I hear my instrument call. I'm looking at the sheet. I'm wondering, why is he calling? It's not my turn. And my friend Valerie leaned over and she said, Mike, that was the harpist. She said, Mike, that was a cut. Number 17 or whatever is big cut. I went, oh. And then I stood up. And when Marvin saw me, he goes, hey, did you have a nice vacation? So so the whole audience is cracking up, at the fact. And I just, and then I started so I could start the whole orchestra. But it's moments like that, yeah, that I look back on, and it's they're embarrassing at the time, but you think, that was kind of fun actually that it happened. So,
well, having played for so many years, what's one thing or a couple of things that you really miss about having a full-time Seattle Symphony gig, and maybe one or two things that you really are so happy that you don't have to do anymore?
Well, there's some modern music I'm glad I don't have to do anymore that we did quite a bit of. But as far as what I miss, I mean, I just miss the the atmosphere of it all. When you walk into Benaroya Hall and then you walk out on stage, you feel the audience, you feel your colleagues around it, you hear the warming up and the preparations in the air, you just get really psyched, and then when the lights go down, it's just it's just a feeling that you always appreciate and you never get over, and I miss that, that aspect of it. And also, unlike a lot of timpanists, I had my own private studio there in the hall, and I enjoyed going there, working, doing maintenance, working, practicing, and whatnot. It was like my own world within the symphony world. So I those things I miss, and my colleagues, I miss the interaction, that a lot of us had. I felt bad. I mean, there were after my last performance, there were tears, from people around me, that didn't want to see me go, and that touched me, So I miss my colleagues as well. So it was a great run. I just, uh, I don't know, I just can't express my thanks and appreciation enough for having had the opportunity.
Mm.
And then when I think back, it began with Ryan Medell.
Mm.
He gave me my shot. So.
Wow. And with all the years of experience, and I know you've mentioned a little bit about young musicians, but what advice would you give to young musicians trying to put a career together, maybe struggling at times, with auditions? It's tough out there. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it is tough, and for me, I always kept in mind that it was all about having a musical experience, and that transcends. It's not just performing, it's also teaching, or a combination of the two. So I never approached it like, I gotta have a symphony job, or if I don't get a symphony job, I'm a failure, kind of thing. I just that type of mindset, I think, can actually do you more harm than good. It can sabotage your chances. I mean, that's how I look at it. So I think you should, if you decide to major in music, you decide which path that you want to take. You want to always have alternatives, I feel, and also stay focused on the bigger picture. It's all about having a musical experience, whether you're conveying that through the performance medium, or you conveying that, as a teacher, or a combination of the two, or as a lecturer, or whatever, whatever avenue that you choose. I mean, you may not always be able to get the first one, but you get the other one. I always reminded my students that you could almost form a line from Seattle to New York of guys or girls who were qualified or were hoping to get what I had, and so there are more people out there than there are jobs, but there's enough music to go around for everybody. So I just encourage people to look at it as a musical experience, whatever you decide to do. And if your first choice doesn't happen, then there's always another one, where you can express yourself. That's how I look at it.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, thanks for joining me. Anything else you want to talk about? Anything that we missed that you really want to put it out there and talk about?
Nothing I can think of, other than if I could take a chance to say thank you, Seattle, audience members and musicians, for like I said, it was a good run. I felt well embraced, what I did, and I enjoyed doing it. And I just wish everybody well, especially at a time like this.
Well, thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
You too, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Off the Podium. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode.